Obviously, it's only 1 week. I don't think you should be panicking over everybody who had a bad game. I'll talk about them all, but I'm going to be very clear to you what guys I'm worried about and what guys I think are going to be just fine. We're going to grade everybody out with the scale 1 to 10. 1, I'm not worried at all. 10, yes, I am panicking. Now, we're going to go by position, and here at tight end, we're going to loop everybody into 1, and I am probably at about a 7 out of 10 in my panic meter with elite level tight ends. Because in week 1, you had 8 points from Trey McBride, 2.1 from Dalton Kincaid, 6.4 from Travis Kelce, 3.4 for Mark Andrews, 1.5 for Evan Ingram. David Njoku gets injured, Jake Ferguson gets injured, and hell, the tight end position is a disaster. And honestly, this was a year where the elite level tight ends had never been so cheap. And I don't understand this. I'm going to draft a lot of them. And yeah, we are getting crushed. Now, I will say there are a handful of tight ends here that I'm not worried about at all. Looking at Trey McBride, the underlying usage numbers from his snaps, his routes run, his target percentage in this offense, all of it looks really good. I actually moved Trey McBride up to the tight end 2 in my rest of season rankings over on flockfantasy.com. I'm not worried about McBride at all. Dalton Kincaid, yes, he does nothing, but if you look at the underlying usage numbers, they look fine as well. I think Kincaid should have a bounce back going into the future. The older veteran tight ends, such as Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, especially Mark Andrews, where you see the massive blow up for Isaiah Likely, where Likely is an inch away from literally 10xing the amount of fantasy points scored in week 1 versus Mark Andrews. Those are going to be the guys I'm a little more worried about. I'm most worried about Andrews. Probably after that, Evan Ingram, then Travis Kelce. I did recently move Andrews down to about tight end 8 in my rest of season rankings. Isaiah Likely up to tight end 12, but Likely may actually be moving up a little bit further because you have both the injuries to Jake Ferguson and David Njoku. So yeah, be worried with the tight ends, except if you have Trey McBride. McBride, the underlying numbers were great. Now going over to wide receiver, looking at the guys that I'm least worried for to most worried for. Amon-Ra St. Brown. Yes, if you were relying on St. Brown for your Sunday night matchup, he did nothing for you. I mean, I'm sure you were expecting 20 points. It's going to be a high scoring game. And St. Brown comes out. He has 3 receptions for 13 receiving yards. This is pretty much a career low for Amon-Ra St. Brown. And especially if you consider the fact that he was an every down player in this game. You go over and look at the fact that Amon-Ra St. Brown played 60 out of 61 snaps. He ran 32 routes on 32 Jared Goff dropbacks. So yes, this sucks if you started him on Sunday night, which you did if you drafted him. But my panic meter is 3 out of 10. I honestly am not that concerned at all with the Amon-Ra St. Brown. The volume was there. He did have 6 targets. I think Goff will be, a little more of a high volume passer in weeks to come. He only completed 18 passes for 217 passing yards this week. I think things will get a lot better for Amon-Ra St. Brown going into the future, and I'm honestly not that worried. Now, Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be a 4 out of 10 on my panic meter scale. Harrison has a worse week than Amon-Ra St. Brown, where you probably also drafted Harrison either at the very end of round 1 or the very beginning of round 2 if you look at his ADP in drafts this year. And Harrison is at the very bottom of this Arizona Cardinals box score in receiving yards, receptions, pretty much everything but targets. You have more receiving yards going to Trey Benson. You have more receiving yards going to Elijah Higgins. You have more receiving yards going to Amari DeMercado in this offense than Marvin Harrison Jr. Obviously, at the end of the game, you had that play that Harrison was wide open. Kyler didn't throw it to him, and everybody is losing their mind. I do want to take a step backwards. The reason why I quote-unquote ranked Marvin Harrison Jr. too low, according to y'all in the comment section in week 1, was because he's a rookie wide receiver, right? We want to be more hesitant with these rookies. We want to give them time to get implemented, get used to the NFL. I still think Marvin Harrison Jr. was an elite level prospect coming out of Ohio State. I still think this is going to be an average to above average Arizona Cardinals offense. Kyler Murray only had 162 passing yards in week 1. I think it's going to be a lot better going into the future. And Harrison's a rookie, so I'm not really too concerned. He did run pretty much every route. You had 38 Kyler dropbacks, and you had 36 routes run, according to the data over there at PFF that Nathan Janke put together. Now, going over to Seattle, a wide receiver I actually didn't draft much was Jackson Smith-Njigba. But JSN comes out and he only has 2 receptions for 19 receiving yards. And I would love to come out and say, oh, I told y'all, everybody was hyping up JSN for no reason. He's overrated. I would love to do a little victory lap. But the reality of the situation is the underlying usage was actually decent for JSN. If you look at this chart from PFF regarding the snap share that JSN had with this team, JSN pretty much played a career high level of snaps. And at the same time, if you're looking at what you have with the overall Seattle Seahawks passing offense, they just had 171 passing yards. I expect that Geno's probably going to be much better than this going forward. The main concern that you would have with JSN is Tyler Lockett does lead the team in targets. Tyler Lockett has 7 targets. So you know what? We're actually going to put JSN 5 out of 10 on the panic meter, because if Lockett doesn't scale back at all, there's just simply not enough production to go around for JSN to be viable with DK Metcalf, obviously, and then at the same time, Lockett actually commanding target volume. I guess you can kind of throw DK Metcalf onto this list as a panic too. I just think we kind of understand who Metcalf is. He's going to be a high in wide receiver 3, low in wide receiver 2 every year in fantasy. I don't think there's much to discuss outside of that. Underdog just released the promos this week. It's nuts. Tuesday, you have a free no sweat pick'em. Even if you lose, you get your money back. Wednesday, you have a CeeDee Lamb special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard. Thursday, you have a 30% profit boost. Friday, a random surprise promo. Saturday, you have college football discounts. Sunday, you have NFL discounts. No idea how Underdog is doing this many in one given week. Take advantage with code FLOCK, and you are going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you will get yours truly breaking down your fantasy football team for you as long as you use code FLOCK on Underdog and make it minimum a $10 deposit with a link in the description and comment section. Now, going over to somebody that I started this week, and I potentially just lost my week 1 matchup because of Amari Cooper. Now, I don't want to blame Amari himself because his quarterback in Deshaun Watson had 169 passing yards. This is a completely different side note, but if you go through and look at the passing volume that you had in week 1 in the NFL, it was just obnoxiously bad. I don't know if we've really ever seen anything like this. Maybe I'm overreacting, but I mean, I even went out and tweeted that Daniel Jones, 186 passing yards, Cousins, 155, Fields, 156, Kyler, 162, Caleb, 93. Thank you, Caleb. You're in my lineup. Levis 127, Brissett 121, Burrow 164, Lawrence 162, Daniels 184, Herbert 144, Bryce Young 161, Bo Nix 138, Geno 171, Watson 169, Dak 179. Not saying all these quarterbacks perform poorly, just from a fantasy football perspective, there wasn't a lot of passing volume to go around. And if you watched this Cleveland Browns offense, Deshaun Watson looked like one of, if not the worst starting quarterbacks in the NFL outside of Daniel Jones and Bryce Young. Now, yes, there were a lot of injuries here in Cleveland, and yes, they were going up against a very tough defense in Dallas. But Cleveland was actually favored in this game by about 2.5 points, and Watson could not throw the ball deep downfield. From my perspective, and I never have, and I probably never will pretend to be some expert quarterback guru scout. Obviously, you know, I'm just an idiot on the internet, but it looked like Deshaun Watson would just check literally one read. It was one read. That guy was typically 5 yards down the field at the very furthest. And if that guy was not open, the pocket had collapsed at that point, and Watson, that play was done. Amari Cooper does have 9 targets. Amari Cooper dominates with the target volume here. He does come very close to a long receiving touchdown that would have saved my week this week, but goes right through his hands. So it's frustrating. I don't think this is an Amari issue. I think this is more so a Deshaun Watson issue. But honestly, given the target volume that he had, I will put him at a 5 out of 10 on the panic scale. I don't think he deserves to be a 6 out of 10. But a guy that was on my bench that I may consider putting at wide receiver 2 is actually Terry McLaurin. Now, this is going to be tough because McLaurin comes out and does absolutely nothing in this game. Luckily, he was on my bench. But anyway, you had Jaden Daniels actually performing well from a fantasy perspective. Obviously, he had the rushing production. But the issue with Daniels, which you kind of knew coming into the season, was the passing volume just simply will not be there. Now, what I didn't expect is that while the passing volume wasn't great overall, what was the main driver of this was Daniels was not looking deep downfield. Now, whether this was the defensive coordinator that they were going up against, whether this was just his first NFL game ever, it was very different than the Jaden Daniels that we saw at LSU. The Jaden Daniels that we saw at LSU was consistently taking deep shots downfield. Now, of course, he had Malik Nabers and Brian Thomas, very different than this Washington team. Whereas here, the leading receivers were Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson Jr. Then after that, it was Zach Ertz. Then after that, it was Luke McCaffrey. Everything was just right there at the line of scrimmage. And we know that that's not where Terry McLaurin operates. Terry McLaurin needs the quarterback that's going to be willing to take those shots deep downfield. McLaurin does play pretty much every snap. McLaurin does run pretty much every single route. And McLaurin only comes away with 4 targets for 2 receptions and 17 receiving yards. So my panic meter with McLaurin, if we don't have Daniels changing the average depth of target for the receivers in this offense, it's pretty high. I'm at 6 out of 10 with Terry McLaurin. And my main decision on who I'm starting this week in the second flex will come down between Amari Cooper and Terry. Now, going over to Deontay Johnson, my panic meter is at a 7 out of 10. But honestly, this was exactly what you should expect in this Carolina Panthers offense. This was going to be a team that spread the ball out. You had Adam Thielen, Deontay Johnson, Xavier Legette, Jonathan Mingo, all playing a decent amount of snaps. You had all of them receiving a decent amount of targets. You had 4 for Thielen, 5 for Mingo, 7 for Legette, and 6 for Deontay Johnson. And this is what we said coming into the year. I actually tweeted out that wide receivers that we're going to see every target in bad offenses included Malik Nabers, George Pickens, and Terry McLaurin. And everybody was saying like, oh, what about Deontay? What about Deontay? That's not the case here. Deontay Johnson's not going to be a target hog. Deontay Johnson's days of being alpha in the NFL were short-lived and they're over. You look at what Deontay's done for years now. You also look at the fact that the Pittsburgh Steelers gave him up for legitimately nothing just to get the contract off the books so they could throw out God knows who at wide receiver too. Deontay Johnson's not that guy, and it's fine, right? If you're not seeing 30% of your team's target share, you can still be productive in fantasy if you're in a good offense. But the Carolina Panthers, which we knew coming into the season, are not a good offense. You have 30 pass attempts for Bryce Young, 13 completions, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Deontay's not startable, of course. And at the same time, with Deontay Johnson, I think you're a couple weeks away from literally dropping him. But let me refrain from saying that because I know we're going to get so much hate when Deontay scores a touchdown next week. But let's go over to Drake London. Now, Drake London's going to be a 7 out of 10 on the panic meter as well, but a lot of it just has to do with the cost because you took Deontay Johnson in the middle rounds, you took Drake London in the early rounds. And here, if you're looking at Drake London, the main concern is not just that Kirk Cousins turns into a pumpkin, but at the same time, you actually have other receivers in this offense drawing target volume because the expectation was Drake London was going to continue to see 30% of the Atlanta Falcons passing offense, and the passing offense was just going to get significantly better with Kirk Cousins under center. One, the passing offense did not look any better, and I actually saw Hayden Winks tweet this out, who watched every single Kirk Cousins drop back. He was saying he had never seen a quarterback be so still. He had never seen a quarterback be such a statue inside the pocket. This makes a lot of sense with Cousins coming off that torn Achilles. They take Michael Penix with the top 10 pick in the NFL draft, but you see 7 targets for Ray McLeod. You see 5 for Bijan. You see 3 for Pitts. You see 3 for Mooney. You see 3 for London and 2 for Charlie Warnier. I don't even know if I said that name correctly. So if London's not dominating the target share here in Atlanta, and this offense at the same time is not going to be dramatically better than it was a year ago, Drake London becomes a wide receiver that was being drafted as a low-end wide receiver 1 to all of a sudden a player that's very difficult to put into your starting lineup. Now, I am still starting him in week 2 because I think there is an outside chance this was Cousins' first game. Starters didn't play in the preseason for Atlanta. And at the same time, it's a very tough matchup going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. So I think it can get a lot better for Drake London, but it needs to get better very, very soon. Now, going over to Chris Olave, Olave is going to be the highest on this panic meter. Olave is an 8 out of 10. And the reason for this is obviously the New Orleans Saints have a phenomenal day on the offensive side of the ball. They have 5 total touchdowns. They have 380 total yards. And Olave, out of those 380 total yards, accounted for 11 of them. Olave had 2 targets out of 23 Derek Carr pass attempts. Now, it's not a 10 out of 10 because I can't say, oh, okay, maybe it was just the game flow. Obviously, the New Orleans Saints are going to be winning games like this every single week. But my thought process with Olave going into the season is, oh, we know he's a very good wide receiver. We know he's going to dominate targets in New Orleans. The issue is the offense isn't going to be good. And that take we had going into the season could not have been more wrong week 1. So when the offense is bad in New Orleans, which I think it will be some weeks, and what can you do with Olave if he's not producing when the offense actually looks good? Actually, I think 8 out of 10 maybe is a little bit too harsh just because, like we said, it was such a weird game environment that maybe a more competitive game, Olave is a bigger factor. So we'll move it down to 7 out of 10. Now let's go over to the running backs. Derrick Henry, 5 out of 10 on the panic meter scale. With Derrick Henry, we knew he wasn't going to catch the ball, right? This is why I did not draft Derrick Henry at all. And he was somebody that we were avoiding. Turns 31 in January, not going to catch the ball, has declined for 3 straight seasons. You heard me say it all year. But I did not know there was going to be this much of a discrepancy between Justice Hill and Derrick Henry on third downs and in the 2-minute drill. If you go and look at the PFF data, you have 20 snaps played for Justice Hill in the 2-minute drill, 0 for Derrick Henry. You have 11 snaps played on third down for Justice Hill, 0 for Derrick Henry. Now, of course, Derrick Henry is going to get everything at the goal line. Derrick Henry is going to get everything on early downs. So maybe you say, well, Mason, come on, man, this isn't fair. This was just one of the very worst game scripts that you were ever going to have for Henry, which is why I'm only sitting here with a 5 out of 10 on Derrick Henry. I think that going forward in games where the Baltimore Ravens win by a wide margin, Derrick Henry is going to be a lot better than he just was. But specifically in a full PPR format where you'll have 0 usage as a receiver, when you've declined as a rusher for 3 straight seasons, when you turn 31 in January, you just don't have a lot of room for shortcomings. Like in a full PPR format, if Derrick Henry wants to be a top 5 running back in fantasy, if he's not going to catch the ball, he needs to score 20 plus touchdowns this season, minimum. And I know that sounds crazy, but go look at the math and how valuable having that receiving role, or at least just being a capable receiver, is, specifically in a full PPR format. I know people are going to rush and say, oh my gosh, look what Gus Edwards did last year. But my thing is, in a PPR league, Gus Edwards didn't really matter last year. Okay, let's go over and let's look at DeAndre Swift. Now, I put DeAndre Swift in my starting lineup over Ramondre Stevenson. I'm an idiot. I don't know why. I don't know why I trusted a rookie quarterback week 1. But anyway, Swift's going to be a 6 out of 10. You have some positives, you have some negatives. 1, the Chicago Bears offense completely imploded. You had 93 passing yards for Caleb Williams. You had 84 rushing yards for the Bears. And at the same time, this team does not score a single offensive touchdown. Now, I don't have official news on what's going to come of this just yet. But Rome Odunze actually went in for an MRI about an hour before we started recording this. So if Rome's going to miss time here, I think that this may make the offense really stagnate and not be able to improve as fast as you would expect with Caleb's rookie season, with Rome being such a pivotal piece for this team. Now, I will also point out there is a positive here with the DeAndre Swift game. While DeAndre Swift does nothing in fantasy, Roschon Johnson is a healthy scratch. I potentially thought that this was going to be a 3-man split backfield between Khalil Herbert, DeAndre Swift, and Roschon Johnson. And while Travis Homer does come in, Travis Homer actually has 2 carries. It does just kind of look like DeAndre Swift's going to have the backfield. Khalil Herbert will get mixed in a bit. And if Roschon's not as big of a concern here, if the offense gets better, Swift can be viable. I just don't think you can start Swift until we see the offense improve. Now, Chase Brown, the panic meter is going to be a 7 out of 10. Not just because the Bengals offense looked like garbage, but more importantly, if you actually look at the split between Zach Moss and Chase Brown, I had no idea what to expect between these two guys. But Chase Brown played 0 snaps in the 2-minute drill in comparison to Zach Moss at 3. Zach Moss had 7 snaps on third down in comparison to Chase Brown at 1. And Zach Moss had the only goal line rush. So if we're looking at this and you're telling me that Zach Moss is going to be the running back to get used as a receiver, and Zach Moss potentially has the red zone role as well, all of a sudden Chase Brown just becomes a handcuff running back in an offense that I still expect to be good. Obviously, the Bengals have dealt with a bunch of crap going into week 1, so I think maybe this was a little bit of a fluke game for him. And yes, Chase Brown does have more receptions than Zach Moss, but I don't know if Zach Moss is going to allow Chase Brown to really be viable to the point where you can start him outside of a Moss injury. Now, going over to our next back, we're going to put him at a 7 out of 10 just because he was coming off a hamstring. Jaylen Warren gets absolutely dominated by Najee Harris this week. I mean, Jaylen Warren only plays 22 snaps in comparison to Najee at 38 and in comparison to Cordell Patterson at 9. Now, I do want to reiterate, keep in mind, Jaylen Warren was coming off a hamstring. He wasn't on the injury report going into week 1, which is definitely something to note. But even beyond Najee Harris just dominating the snaps here, if Cordell Patterson has any involvement whatsoever, even if it's the tiniest of role, and you switch this from being a 2-man backfield to a 2.5-man backfield, and Jaylen Warren is the second guy in said backfield, it looks like Warren also becomes a running back that is not startable outside of a Najee Harris injury. Now, like I said, we're only putting him at a 7 out of 10 on the panic scale because there is an outside chance that the hamstring injury just held him back and he will expand his role going into week 2. Now, going over to Javonte Williams, Javonte is also going to be at a 7 out of 10 for me here. Javonte, similar to Jaylen Warren, we get confirmation will probably be in a little bit of a 3-man backfield here. I mean, you're looking at Audric Estime seeing snaps, while not a ton. He did get on the fields. You had Jaleel McLaughlin seeing 24 snaps in comparison to Javonte Williams at 36. Javonte only played 36 out of 69 potential snaps for the Denver Broncos. And of course, Javonte is still the starting running back at this point in Denver. But the thing is, and we knew this going into the season, Vegas Sportsbooks told us how bad this Denver Broncos offense was going to be. This should be about a bottom 5 offense overall in the NFL. And if Javonte Williams is only a committee in said offense, you can't be a committee back in one of the worst offenses of the league and be viable in fantasy. Now, the biggest panic I'm going to have here will be Raheem Mostert, 9 out of 10. I am sorry if I told you to start Raheem Mostert week 1. I know I told a lot of people to start Raheem Mostert week 1 based off what we saw last season of Raheem Mostert having the goal line role. What happens this week in Miami? Well, yes, Raheem Mostert has 6 carries for 9 rushing yards, which is absolutely abysmal, pathetic, very, very sad. What's maybe a little bit more important than this is if you actually look at the usage of these backs. Devon Achane is turning into that prime Alvin Kamara, where Devon Achane has both snaps at the goal line in comparison to Raheem Mostert with 0. Devon Achane has 3 snaps in the 2-minute drill in comparison to Raheem Mostert at 0. Devon Achane plays more snaps on third down than Raheem Mostert. So with Mostert, we kind of knew this going into the year. This was going to be a running back that didn't have anything as a receiver. What you were banking on is you were only banking on touchdown upside, touchdown upside, touchdown upside, which obviously he delivered last season. But if Achane is expanding that role to take those touches at the goal line, while Raheem Mostert's still going to be in a committee here in Miami, he's just going to be seeing the low value carries between the 20-yard lines, which really just doesn't make a difference from a fantasy football perspective in particular. So yeah, Mostert, definitely most panicked about him out of anybody else on this list. Does not look startable at this point. Obviously, if week 2, we get a flip here with the goal line roll, then maybe you can go to him. Or also week 2 or beyond, obviously, if Achane were to get injured, then Mostert becomes extremely valuable in fantasy. It just doesn't look like that's the case, right? But I think that's all I have for you this video. I do want to remind you, take advantage of those promos they're doing on Underdog for the beginning of the season. The no sweat pick'em on Thursday. Even if you lose, you get the money back. Wednesday, the CeeDee Lamb more than less than half a total yard. Thursday, the 30% profit boost. Friday, the surprise special promo. Saturday, the discounted college football games. And Sunday, the discounted NFL games. You can take advantage of all that with the link in the description, comment section. If you use code FLOCK, you're also going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, I will break down your fantasy football team for you in a podcast. But I think that's all I got for you. I really do appreciate you. I really hope you have a great day. And I hope I get to see you out in the live stream later tonight so I can look at your team.